Greetings from Costa Rica, and thank you very much for joining me tonight. My name is Matt Rosensteel, hashtag Costa Rica Matt, joining you live from Playa Junquillal, Guanacaste, Costa Rica. It's March 30th. This is our 13th consecutive Wednesday night live Costa Rica chat with Costa Rica Matt. I was doing some research before the show, and yes, this is the single longest running podcast by any kind of Matt related to Costa Rica real estate. So we've kept it consistent so far this year. And if you stuck with me so far, thank you very much for doing so. And as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're looking for good information about Costa Rica. Tonight, we're going to do our monthly question and answer roundup here. We have a series of 8 total questions we're going to cover. These are questions viewers like you have submitted over the previous month of March 2022. And we'll also touch base on Costa Rica news this month because there are a couple big things happening in the country. And in fact, as I stream this, we will be updating you on the Costa Rica USA CONCACAF Men's World Cup qualifying match. I've got a scoreboard over here so that we can keep track of that. It's a pure pride game tonight where both teams don't really need to perform well in order to secure their result, but we'll also be touching base on that. So tonight we'll go first over the Costa Rica March news, including some soccer explanation and the presidential election, which is pretty darn important. Next, we're going to go over a group of follow-up questions related to our episode on cars. Doug Price was nice enough to come back and give me some answers to a few questions people had posed. Then we're going to go over everything from Uber to finding land for sale. We'll talk about transferring money for your real estate purchase. We're also going to discuss briefly why you don't see many Costa Rica businesses for sale. I want to touch quickly on how Costa Rica residency affects your U.S. obligation to file a tax return. And finally, I'll give a quick little overview of how I've seen people file tax returns down here in Costa Rica. Again, thank you very much for joining me. My name is Matt Rosensteel, and stay tuned. It's March 30th. We're live in Costa Rica tonight with our monthly roundup of viewer questions, and we're going to cover a range of topics tonight. But first and foremost, one of the things I wanted to do in this monthly episode is touch on the news and what's going on here in Costa Rica. And one of the most important things that is coming up is that this Sunday, the runoff of the top 2 presidential candidates will be decided at the polls. That's right, Costa Rica has most of its elections, I think every election, on a Sunday, which happens to make it easier for people not to have to miss work to vote. There are 2 candidates, and in the Costa Rica system, these are the top 2 who ran in the general election against each other. From the PLN, or the Partido Liberación Nacional, we have José María Figueres, and from the Partido Progreso Social Democrático, we have Rodrigo Chávez. Coming into the general election, José María Figueres absolutely got the highest number of votes in the first round because there were 7 presidential candidates, or maybe even more than that, in the first round. You may remember that José María Figueres is the son of the person who led the forces to victory in Costa Rica's short civil war in 1948. So José María Figueres and the Partido Liberación Nacional, PLN, they are the big guys in town. They're absolutely the established political party that has had the most influence over Costa Rica's politics since the 50s until today. Now, what's happened is that as Costa Ricans' choices were narrowed down to just two candidates, it turns out that a lot of people don't necessarily like Jose Maria Figueres. And in fact, the strength of Liberación and their reputation, and really the fact that they've ruled the country so much, is definitely coming out in polls. And in fact, Jose Maria Figueres had a complicated past where he allegedly received money from a contractor, and then he definitely left the country at an interesting time while that was being investigated. So Jose Maria Figueres was not necessarily popular with anybody outside of his hardcore PLN base. And now opinion polls that are coming out over the last couple days show that Rodrigo Chavez has continued to definitely be favored. He's looking at a margin of about 54% support to Figueres' 33% in a recent poll. Among that poll, or the people that responded to it, people who had definitely decided on their candidate were about 60-40 favoring Rodrigo Chavez. Now, to be clear, it's been a very interesting post-general election runoff. Almost immediately after Rodrigo Chavez emerged as the second place presidential candidate, certain allegations emerged, and actually details of his past. While he was working at the Indonesia World Bank, there were allegations made by a number of younger female employees at the Indonesia World Bank that he had not treated them with respect, to say the least. And these allegations did seem to definitely put a dent in his shine as Costa Rica's next president. However, I was expecting, to look up polls and see that perhaps Figueres had sort of closed things up, but really it's looking like Rodrigo Chavez has a very solid lead, and that his party, the Partido Progreso Social Democrático, will have the presidency. Again, that is this Sunday, April 3rd. So we'll be finding out about that very soon here. And in other news, I wanted to touch on the fact that right now, the CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers are wrapping up, where the 8 teams of CONCACAF that had made it to this qualifying tournament are finishing off their final match tonight. They've played a total of 14 when it's done, because they play every other team in the group twice. From CONCACAF, 3 teams, the top 3, will absolutely be directly seeded into the World Cup. The 4th place is going to get a chance to play a team from Oceanica, which I don't want to spoil the game for anybody, but New Zealand and the Solomon Islands were playing to determine that winner. I already ruined it in my comments. My apologies. New Zealand won. They actually creamed the Solomon Islands 5-0. And Costa Rica is that 4th place team right now in CONCACAF that will have an opportunity to enter into the World Cup if they can win a playoff with New Zealand. So that playoff is going to determine which of those 2 teams gets into the seed and goes back to the World Cup. If you weren't witness to it, Costa Rica had an absolutely miraculous World Cup run. I think that must have been in 2012, where this small team came out of nowhere. They beat teams. Eventually, they got out of their group. Their group was labeled the group of death in the initial stage of the World Cup. They had Italy, Uruguay, and I can't remember the 3rd team, but they were able to be one of the top 2 teams in that group. They beat Italy, I think, and really did a great job. Then they played Greece in a playoff, the round of 16. They beat Greece, which no one expected Costa Rica to be able to do. And then they played the Netherlands in the round of 8. So they were actually 2 games away from the final of the World Cup. Unfortunately, they battled all they could. They even had a red card, went down to 10 men, but they made it to a shootout with the Netherlands. The Netherlands brought in a substitute goalie, this massive guy. I can't remember his name right now, but an absolute monster in goal. Costa Rica couldn't win the shootout, and everybody who loves this country was so deflated. I mean, that 2012 run had the country absolutely on its feet. I mean, when they won the game with Greece, essentially the government called a national holiday. People went immediately out into the streets to celebrate. So it's a very big deal. Central America is focused on football, soccer, and they have been forever. And when you see the national team here, it's definitely always been a focal point of national pride when they're able to produce results. Interestingly, I was looking up the makeup of the national team. Of the 16 people in the squad tonight, 10 of them are players who, during their day jobs, play internationally outside of Costa Rica. And they're everywhere in the world, from Korea to Greece. I think there's one player in Spain on Levante, but they're sort of all across the globe. And then you do see that the remaining 6 players in that squad tonight are Costa Ricans who are playing in a national league here normally. All of them are on one of the 3 best national teams, Saprissa, La Liga, or Heredia. And I don't say that in order of which one I think is best. But you will see here that those 3 teams are the ones that inspired the most passion. And definitely Saprissa and La Liga, which is short for La Liga Deportiva Alajuelense, or basically the sporting group from Alajuela. Saprissa and La Liga are the really 2 big ones. And what you call a Clásico here in Costa Rica is when those 2 teams square off. As of now, we still have a 0-0 tie between Costa Rica and the U.S. in that last game. Again, it's for pride because they've both secured their relative positions in the table. So 3 of the questions that I wanted to start off with for our monthly roundup here of viewer-submitted questions were given by Steve. Thanks very much for checking in once again, Steve. Appreciate it. And I asked Doug Price from Price Auto Sales back in Dominical to come back onto the show, give his answers very quickly, and provide some more insight. So without further ado, here are our first 3 questions of the monthly roundup with Doug Price. Doug, thanks so much for joining me to answer some follow-up questions that we had over the month of March here. First off, in our list of questions today, we had a viewer ask, which port do people typically import cars into in Costa Rica? We've got the East and West Coast. What are they using?
Mostly through Limon.
On the Caribbean side.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that
80%.
Okay, excellent. Limon is on the Caribbean side, and I can see why that makes a lot of sense. You're connected to all kinds of U.S. shipping ports through the Gulf and, much easier transit. One viewer asked specifically about Subarus in Costa Rica. Are they a good brand to own here?
So it's an excellent brand, but I would be very hesitant about bringing one here. You'll notice there's some Foresters, and we actually have one here that was through our body shop. It was in an accident, and the engine was cracked. And I would say 80% of the parts were fairly easy to get, but it's been 3 months to get the engine. So if this were a Toyota RAV4, Toyota anything, it would have been 2 days.
Okay.
So it's, Hondas, if it's a Honda. So in my experience with Subarus, if you absolutely have to have one, Forester is about the only model that I would do. And Honda, maybe, a Civic or a CRV. But
Okay.
I've had Honda Pilots, I've had Honda Odysseys, great vehicles, but getting a part for them is a nightmare.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other
Off the top of my
particular
head, anything
brands?
European is a little challenging too.
Okay. What sorts of delays would somebody be looking at to get those European parts? I could imagine that'd be horrendous.
2 to 3 weeks, and
Okay.
what we've experienced, so it's not bad. What we've experienced is that you're going to have 1 out of 10 to 1 out of 15 packages pulled from customs. So if it's not pulled from customs, 10 days, 10 business, 2 to 3 weeks. If it's pulled from customs, there's another 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, and it seems to be luck of the draw on that. I've had people get their glasses taken by customs because they're medical equipment. All kinds of weird things can happen with those.
Yeah. And the downside to that is, okay, if you have a part that you acquire here for a Toyota, a fuel pump, whatever, and let's say it's defective, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, you can take it back. It sucks, but you can take it back and get another one. If it's defective and it came from Europe or Idaho, it's not that easy. I mean, you have to pay to ship it back.
Yeah.
So you really want to get a vehicle that you can just fix it here, and that's going to be Toyota, Mitsubishi, Hyundai, Suzuki, the top 6 or 7 brands.
Perfect. And those we did cover in more detail in a previous interview that Doug had done for me. They do call Idaho the Europe of the Midwest. Next question. Do you have anything to do with registering vehicles here in Costa Rica? And if so, how do you do it?
So we have a legal department. It's above my pay grade. We don't do too many. There's a couple of models that Hyundai models that we import directly from Korea. They're just better built there, and they have turbo diesel versions where every other version is in gas, and they're just a phenomenal vehicle. So the entire process, once they arrive to port, and that time frame is going to change on depending on its origin. So, but once they arrive in port, you're looking at 2 weeks to 3 weeks, somewhere around there. So I know that there's an initial Retevia inspection that has to be done.
Okay.
Passes that, then you're allowed to get the Marchamo. Then you have to take it to Retevia again. Jenny is our lead notary attorney, hands down best attorney I've found in Costa Rica, and she's awesome. Speaks English. She put together a 3-page document, step by step, not only what you do once it's here, but if you want to know step by step what you have to do, WhatsApp me, and I will just shoot you a PDF. And also put her contact. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask her.
Perfect. If you're looking to register a vehicle here,
patience.
I was going to say, it sounds more like it could be a 1-sentence overview, and it says, put your legal department on it, or, put somebody knowledgeable on the task and pay them to do it rather than trying yourself.
Yep. You have to hire a company from the country of origin. You have to hire a broker here in Costa Rica. You're going to have an attorney. It's not anything you can wing or try yourself.
Absolutely. All right. Last question for you. We had been chatting and you brought up a very interesting issue that I don't realize as a real estate agent. What is one of the most common reasons foreigners have a problem buying cars here, and how can they avoid it?
The biggest problem they have is moving their money here. Banking is very, very challenging. It's very difficult here, and it's actually becoming more difficult in some other countries as well. So the biggest advice I can give you is prior to moving, prior to that, making that change, go talk to your banker. Go to your branch office, explain what's going on. When my wife and I first moved here, we didn't understand. We moved here, we tried to buy a car. We wanted to wire $10,000 down. And first of all, we realized our Costa Rican account wouldn't let us because you could only do $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
maybe it's 1,500. So that didn't help us. So we just wanted to wire the money directly to the business that we bought the car from. And my bank said, no, I have to be in my bank to fill out the paperwork.
Yep.
And it was really just, every bank has several levels of checking accounts that you can have.
Yep.
Well, there just happened to be one that if we kept a 10,000 minimum or something like that, it was a higher level checking account with higher annual fees. And miraculously, we were allowed to wire money from our account on our PC from anywhere in the world. And it just made our life easier, not just for buying a car, but you want to buy furniture. There's going to be a lot of large ticket items, a refrigerator. It's really nice to be able to, from your phone, from your PC, wire money where you want to go. It'll make your life a lot easier on everything.
Yeah, absolutely. With real estate transactions, we're always dealing with an escrow provider, and generally speaking, the clients are in the US. We've definitely had it become an issue where somebody is not able to get to their branch to be able to wire funds into escrow, but it's something that I forget people are going to need to make large purchases down here in Costa Rica after their house or their piece of land or their condo. And it can be a pain to wire large sums of money internationally, because down here you've got such strict anti-money laundering laws. And a lot of US banks are only sending international wires for in-person appointments. So I really appreciate that insight.
Yeah, when you get here, the first thing you want to do is get a car. You need a car. You need to move. And so what you don't want to do is get here and then wait a week or two to get a bank account open and then try to do your initial wire transfer and everything else. You want to have that set up so at least when you get a car, whoever you buy it from, you've got the ability to wire it to. That's the biggest piece of advice I can give.
Appreciate the advice. Doug Price, once again, I appreciate your time. I promise I will someday find other guests to appear on my YouTube channel. Have a good one, and we'll see you soon down towards Dominical. Doug Price was very nice once again to answer those questions. As a quick update here in the CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers, we're 19 minutes in. Still a 0-0 tie, so you don't have to tune away from Costa Rica, Matt, for any reason here. I'll keep you posted. Let's keep moving through a list of questions that people have submitted this month. First off being whether or not Uber or Lyft are available in Costa Rica. And to be quite honest, this was a question for which I had zero answer because we own cars and we're rarely in places where we would be looking for any kind of taxi service. However, I wanted to say, I called a guy in Tamarindo, one of the places you would expect to see this service actually starting. And apparently Uber and Lyft are still basically just one or two people maybe doing it. And really, it's not widely adopted. Now, I am absolutely positive in the Central Valley, the massive city, yes, Uber and Lyft are apps there. And in fact, there's conflicts between taxi drivers and them in that area. But out in our coast, I would not plan to use Uber or Lyft. We have all kinds of wonderful transportation providers that are informally available for hire. They're called taxistas piratas, basically illegal taxi drivers that circulate in small cars constantly. If you learn the routes where these people are widely available, you're able to find someone to give you a ride at a pretty cheap price at pretty much any hour of the day in a place like Tamarindo. Obviously, those people, you do have to be careful and make sure you're not getting into the wrong car. But generally speaking, these people work constantly, and you can trust that some of the folks with taxis sitting out and waiting to pick people up in beach towns are absolutely fine to use for rides. And especially once you're able to speak Spanish, they can be extremely cheap. to the point where you're paying a couple dollars for a cross-town ride. I just realized I neglected to mention I have to include that my 4-year-old Daniel gave me this wonderful present before heading out tonight. Daniel, thank you very much. And everybody, there's a gnome on the back holding the heart, presenting it there. So wanted to make sure I did mention that to Daniel and explain what that thing in my pocket was with all the glitter. Question number 4 tonight that we're going to cover is, how can you find land for sale in Costa Rica? And can Canadians have land rights? Let me ask the audience, is there anybody out there who wants to comment as to whether or not Canadians can have land rights here in Costa Rica? Let's see, it's a yes or no answer. Well, we might not get an answer there. Absolutely, Canadians, foreigners can have property here, and there's fee simple ownership of property is granted to foreigners even without their residency. You can come down and use your passport to buy property, and assuming that you're not buying some of the leased beachfront land, you will be buying a fee simple titled property. Now, as for finding land in Costa Rica, I'm also realizing there's a big delay between my stream and people reading it. So yes, the correct answer is yes. I don't want to get too elaborate on buying land in Costa Rica. I actually have a video explaining this. I'm going to put that link in the comments here on the 100% trust that no one leaves and watches that other video. But essentially what I want to emphasize is that if you're looking for land for sale here in Costa Rica, first of all, you have to start your search on the ground. I really feel that anybody trying to do internet searches for specific parcels of land is going to get lost in all of the noise that's on the internet. And second of all, even though you're going to see 1 million se vende signs for sale around every community you're in, you still need an experienced realtor to help you search for land here in the country. Because first of all, those for sale signs can be on any kind of property that might even be stolen from its original owner. It might be on land where there's no water right. There might be all kinds of title issues with that particular farm. And if you want to find a plot of land, it is absolutely worth the 5 or 6% of the total asking price to have a realtor guide you through the process. So without further ado, there is the link in the comments to my video where I elaborate further on the whole process of finding land, doing your due diligence, and being protected as a buyer here. Next, a viewer had asked, what is the best way to transfer money to buy real estate in Costa Rica? Absolutely, 100% of the time for Costa Rica real estate transactions, you should use an escrow service, a neutral third party that has a bank account here in Costa Rica or in the US, perhaps even Canada, but most often it's either in Costa Rica or the US. And by using that neutral third party as the steward of your funds, you're really taking another good step to protecting yourself in your real estate transaction. That escrow service will sometimes be able to open escrow very quickly with less paperwork needed. If you're bringing the money to a Costa Rica escrow service, we've found that now the financial oversight laws here, the anti-money laundering legislation that's come about, has really made it so that you have to submit a ton of financial due diligence documentation in order to send funds to a Costa Rica escrow account. More and more, you're seeing realtors here opt to use escrow services that are based in the US just because you don't get that international transfer of money down to Costa Rica, where you're going to have to prove the origin of funds to a T, really demonstrate that this money is yours, that you came by it honestly. You'll even have to submit tax returns. So it can be difficult, but for a real estate purchase, absolutely you should use a third-party neutral escrow service. There are occasional times when, for example, we've got a Costa Rican seller and buyer. You can close a real estate transaction at a bank if the funds are coming from Costa Rica. You'll see that really you can meet with the attorneys, sign a transfer deed, and simultaneously wire money as a way to close if, for example, you just can't use an escrow service for one reason or another. That is also growing in frequency simply because of all of that difficulty with Costa Rica escrow services, the delays that they can create with real estate transactions, and in many cases, the buyer's preference to keep more of their financial information to themselves and not with the government. Still 0-0 in the Costa Rica USA game, by the way. And we're moving right on to a question about Costa Rica businesses for sale. Water break. A viewer asked why so few people are covering Costa Rica businesses for sale. You don't see many on vlogs. You don't see them listed or huge numbers compared to residential real estate. It's tough to put my finger exactly on why you don't see too many Costa Rica businesses listed for sale. But to start out, you would see that in major tourism towns, very few of the tenants in hot areas, whether it's Jaco, Tamarindo, etc., actually own the real estate in which their business is located. So when you do see businesses listed for sale here, it's often taking over a lease of a property, acquiring the inventory and brand, etc. Frequently, you would see that there are no recognizable established brands. We don't have huge chains in the number that you see in other countries, to the point where, it's easier to purchase a McDonald's because you can fully understand the numbers. The name recognition brings significant value, and they probably have years of really proven numbers. Down here in Costa Rica, we've got family-run restaurants, bars, all kinds of stuff that really, first of all, isn't as easy a product to sell to begin with, because you might find that the current ownership is such an important part of how they earn revenue. They're the two people who work at the restaurant, or they're the hotel owners that consistently bring 50 to 60% of the bookings. So it's harder in the first place to even evaluate and for buyers to really feel confident about purchasing a business. Second of all, you definitely see fewer people who are fully prepared to move to Costa Rica and in doing so also purchase an operating business. It's intimidating enough to go through condos and look at land and homes. Lots of people think that coming down here and purchasing an established business would be extremely difficult. And so it's a tough market to be in anyhow. So those are just two of the dynamics that really make it not so common. And definitely the abundance of people who just want to buy a condo, a simple home, or have their project here. That makes it so most realtors, vloggers, people in the industry do focus on residential real estate rather than commercial. Let's move on. We had a question, number 7 on the list tonight. Does Costa Rica residency exempt you from filing a U.S. tax return? And if so, the viewer wanted to know which of those statuses would provide you the opportunity to not file your U.S. tax return. Permanent, pensionado, etc. The bad news is, folks, as long as you are a living, breathing U.S. citizen, you have to file a tax return, whether you're a resident in another country or not. I was horrified to realize that, and even as a U.S. taxpayer living abroad, making very little money here in my first years, we were still expected as a U.S. registered LLC, of course, to pay our FICA taxes. So I was self-employed, working for a nonprofit and making a tiny income. And still, I owed the government something like $3,800 per year until our beautiful babies came along and gave us those absolutely wonderful tax breaks. Now we're getting zero essentially, but we do have to file a tax return. And until you renounce your citizenship, my understanding is you have to file it every year, come heck or high water. We're going to go on to number 8 here. How do expats file their U.S. taxes? The viewer, the same as before, wanted to understand that. I would say that a good number simply have their U.S. accountant still handle things. They email them financial records. But you do see that there are tax accountants living here in Costa Rica that very much are catering to the expat community and will help you file your U.S. return out of their office. I think there's one in Tamarindo. Lots of places where you see a ton of expats. I am positive there's a U.S. accountant willing to file your tax return internationally. We've gotten some great questions in the chat that I'm just going to start plowing through. How many expats and how many have passive income? Is it worth it to work there, or are salaries too low? There are lots of expats who are working in Costa Rica. I can't put a number on it whatsoever. But you see tons of foreigners who own small hotels. Maybe they have cabins on their property as sort of Airbnb rentals. You see people who are doing all kinds of small businesses, making kombucha, giving massages, providing psychological care, all on and on and on. So you do see a lot of expats working here. But generally speaking, they're doing something that is not competing with Costa Ricans for a salary, because you're right, salaries for a lot of skilled positions here are going to be far too low for you as a foreigner to be at all interested if you're coming from the US and used to making, $50 to $80 to $100,000 for a white collar job. Let's take a step back and mention that, first of all, it is illegal for anybody to work here who is not a permanent resident or citizen, obviously. If you're living here on investor status, if you're here as a pensioner, or one of the other temporary residency programs, you are not supposed to be collecting a Costa Rican salary as an employee of an organization here. Yes, you can be working and receiving your income from the US if you're doing digital work and remotely living here in Costa Rica. But unless you're a permanent resident or citizen, it would be illegal for companies to hire you for that salaried position in the first place. Lots of foreigners own their business, and the workaround is that, my business, Costa Rica does allow foreign investors to own shares of stock in Costa Rica corporations. So people have their corporation and their plan would be, I'm not working here illegally. It's just my company that's providing X or Y service, and I'm the owner of that company that I invested in. But in the spirit of the law, you're not supposed to actually be working and collecting the income directly, but rather as just the fruits of your company's profits. Still at 0-0 Costa Rica, USA. I have this huge microphone here. I've never gotten to announce a sports game. And I'm going to be so tempted. I was thinking maybe I'd get the opportunity to do that long goal if it happens. We'll see if it does. But as of 36 minutes into the last game of the qualifiers, 0-0 tie between Costa Rica and the U.S. here. Another great question that came in from Tobias. I appreciate you pinging me here. Is there an official land registry? Yes, absolutely there is. I was talking to a client today, and it's important to understand that this land registry is entirely open to the public, or rather the National Registry of Titled Property. And anybody who can speak Spanish and figure out how to log into it can go in there and look up the title of pieces of land. Now, you have to know the legal farm number of that piece of property to be able to find it. It's not as simple as looking up an overlay of your neighborhood and seeing exactly which properties are which and who owns them. But, for example, in a gated community, if we know one of the farm numbers for a single lot within it, it's pretty easy to use that farm's title to figure out which mother farm it came from, and then we can figure out and pull all of the titles from that specific development because they're linked together historically. All of the farms that are listed in the registry, you can find information about when they've passed from which owner to which. And that way, any farms that or properties that were once linked in history, you can pull all of the titles from the farms that were pulled from it or the different pieces of land. And especially in those gated communities, in condominiums, we are able to start really pulling titles as comps to build real estate data and actually see where stuff has been closing. Next, I heard there's more land sold in Costa Rica that exists. How can you verify it is a legitimate deal and you are not ripped off? I'm going to have to send you some more links, Tobias, or Tobias. My apologies if I've been mispronouncing your name. Definitely, there are ways to do so. And more than anything, the way to ensure you're not ripped off in Costa Rica is to select a great team of people to help you with your purchase. You need a realtor to guide you through the beginning stages of which land is actually for sale. You need their guidance to understand what questions you have to ask. And your realtor is going to introduce you to a team of people, including an attorney who is absolutely in charge of making sure it's not a ripoff, and a surveyor and other inspectors who can help you do your due diligence on any property you're interested in purchasing. And assuming you have picked the right team of people to work with, you are on the path to absolute success in Costa Rica. I can almost guarantee that 99% of those horror stories you have read online, that, some piece of land that was stolen was sold to a poor foreigner, or somebody squatted, or XYZ thing happened here. All of those stories start with somebody making the wrong decision about their team members. And oftentimes that bad decision can be, I'm going to buy this without a realtor involved. I'm going to try and save some money and find an attorney who's not just a fancy gringo lawyer, but somebody local, and really try and work on lower cost structure that way. 3 months later, those are the people who are blogging about Costa Rica and how awful the real estate market can be. And if they're willing to look themselves in the face and in the mirror and admit that they weren't willing to take the right advice or ask for it, and those are the people you most often see furious at Costa Rica in general. Claude did confirm we have Uber in Alajuela, so I'm glad to hear we were right on that. We had a quick question on updating the foreigners' incentives. When are we going to get to import our car and a full container of goods tax-free? We keep talking to different people about this. Andrea Rojas, a residency lawyer, discussed it somewhat. Really, the situation is a bit of a conundrum in that currently, yes, the law has been passed, and according to the current legislation, foreigners are allowed to import a container of goods tax-free under the investor status residency program, but it has still not been implemented on the ground, meaning the forms to fill out to ask for the exemption or the program through which you exempt your container has none of the groundwork laid, according to my understanding, as of March 30th. Now, hopefully that will change. But, we're essentially in a phase that Costa Rica often finds itself in, where the legislature does one thing and passes a law, and the ministry that would be in charge of implementing it has absolutely zero capacity or zero interest in doing so. And in this case, yes, the customs ministry has zero interest in creating mechanisms to allow this exemption, because it's simply going to mean less revenue for them and probably more work to link with the immigration ministry and be able to check those exemptions. So really, we're in a point where the answer is unfortunately complicated at best, and most people are sort of waiting and twiddling their thumbs to see where things go and if the government ever gets around to actually implementing this law that's been passed. Personally, there's, tons of people are pessimistic that it's not ever going to actually happen now and that we'll never see that incentive driven through. Personally, I think that the Costa Rica government had the right idea that a small loss on a customs duty would convince a good number of people or help them move to Costa Rica, and that the gain is so great when you bring down a semi-affluent expat from the US or Canada. It's a huge input into Costa Rica's relatively small economy. So I see that there's just too much money to be earned, and really that the government wants this foreign investment to increase with time. They need your tax revenue. They want you to be down here creating jobs. They need people to get involved locally and really just add money to the local economy. So I feel that hopefully the absolute greed of the national government will eventually force the implementation so that we can see that incentive implemented. If not, oh well, I think there are still millions and millions of other reasons to move to Costa Rica before it's too late. I'm live every Wednesday night here with our Costa Rica chats with Costa Rica Matt. As always, it's been an enormous pleasure. I appreciate you joining, putting your comments, your questions, the chat. If you have any questions you want me to answer on the April Roundup, don't hesitate to post them in the comments of this video. As always, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on my videos. And still 0-0 going into halftime, Costa Rica, USA. Unfortunately, I am not going to be able to fulfill my fantasy of yelling goal into a microphone following an actual goal. Have a good night.